There's a truth that most men don't talk about, but we all feel it: the weight of expectations. It's a silent pressure that grows heavier with each passing year, especially when you start to wonder if you're good enough. For me, it was never about doing enough or being enough. No, it was about the belief that love, true love, has to be earned. It wasn't something I learned from books or movies. It was something my father taught me without even saying a word. Watching him work tirelessly for my mom, watching him sacrifice every ounce of his own happiness for the sake of family, I realized something early on. Love was about sacrifice, and sacrifice meant you had to prove you were worth it. I had the kind of love everyone around me admired. Jenna and I were what people considered perfect. We laughed at the same jokes, spent weekends at the same coffee shops, and shared the same dreams for the future. But deep down, something was off. It wasn't that I didn't love her. It was more that I didn't feel worthy of her love. She was amazing. Ambitious, passionate, driven, the kind of woman who could walk into a room and own it. I knew I was lucky, but every time I looked at her, a gnawing thought crept in. What if I couldn't keep up? What if she deserved more? It wasn't a thought that made sense to anyone else, but to me, it was the truth. She was everything I wasn't: secure, confident, and never afraid to reach for the stars. And I was just trying to hold on to something that felt too big for me. My dreams were big, too. I wanted to build something that mattered. I had to succeed. I had to build a future. But the more I poured into my career, the more I lost touch with the very thing I needed the most: her. Jenna didn't ask me for perfection. She didn't need me to prove my worth every day. But in my head, I told myself that I did. I told myself I had to reach the summit before I could truly have her by my side, and so I sacrificed. I worked long hours, pushed her away without even realizing it, all because of this belief that love was about earning it. It wasn't until the day she told me she was leaving that I realized the truth: love doesn't work that way. You don't have to prove your worth to the person who already sees it in you. But in that moment, I didn't understand. I just thought I needed more time, more success, more something. And as I watched her walk away, the crushing weight of my own insecurities felt heavier than anything I'd ever felt before. At first, Jenna and I were inseparable. When we met, it felt like fate. She had this magnetic energy, something I could never put into words, but I knew it the second I saw her. It was in the way she smiled, the way she carried herself, the way she made the smallest moments feel like they mattered. We fit together perfectly, like two pieces of a puzzle that had been waiting for each other for years. Our weekends were filled with spontaneous adventures, trips to new places, hikes, endless late-night conversations that somehow always turned into deep discussions about our future. We'd talk about kids, about where we wanted to live, about the kind of life we wanted to build. We were on the same page about everything. I thought this was it. The kind of love that everyone dreams of. But as time passed, something began to shift. It wasn't that Jenna changed. She was still the same beautiful, confident woman who lit up every room she entered. No, the shift happened in me. As much as I loved her, as much as I admired her, I started to feel like I was falling short. It wasn't anything Jenna did. She was supportive, always encouraging me to go after my dreams, to take risks, and to trust that I could accomplish whatever I set my mind to. But the more she believed in me, the more I doubted myself. Every time she spoke about her career or her goals, I'd feel this knot tighten in my stomach. She was moving forward, achieving everything she set out to do, while I was stuck. I told myself it was normal. She was ambitious, and I respected that. But deep down, I started to feel like I was losing ground. I was working hard, pushing myself every day, but somehow, it never felt like enough. She was doing all the things I admired, and I just couldn't keep up. Jenna never made me feel inferior, of course. She wasn't the type to ever put me down or belittle my ambitions. But I started to believe the narrative in my head: she's going places. She deserves someone who's already there. I thought it was just a phase, a temporary doubt that would go away as I achieved more. But with every passing day, my insecurities only deepened. I kept telling myself, once I've accomplished something big, once I've made it, then I'll be good enough for her. But what I didn't realize was that Jenna didn't need me to prove anything. She already loved me, but I couldn't see that back then. I was too wrapped up in my own fears, too consumed with the idea that love required more than what I could give in the moment. I was waiting for the right time, the right success, the right moment to show her I was worthy. The worst part wasn't when Jenna succeeded, far from it. The worst part was the guilt I felt every time I couldn't be the man I thought I should be. Every time she reached a new milestone, I found myself both proud and terrified. Proud because she was incredible, and terrified because I feared I'd never measure up. I remember nights lying in bed next to her, listening to her talk about her day, her dreams, her next big project. She'd look at me with those bright eyes, all eager and full of hope, and I'd smile, nodding along, trying to seem supportive. But inside, I was suffocating. I could barely keep up with the constant self-criticism that clouded my thoughts. I'd compare myself to her, and to every successful man I read about, every colleague who seemed to have it all figured out. The idea of being less than her, of not being able to match her success or keep up with her ambitions, haunted me. I kept telling myself that I was doing the right thing, that I was working hard, that my time would come. But no matter how much I pushed myself, it was never enough. I felt like I was always a step behind, always trying to prove to myself, and to her, that I could be the man she needed me to be. But the more I tried, the more I realized that nothing was changing. It wasn't just about my career or my success. It was about feeling invisible next to her. I wanted to support her dreams, but I felt like mine were constantly slipping through my fingers. And every time I looked at her, I saw her strength and her confidence, and it made me question mine. How could I be the man she deserved when I didn't even know who I was anymore? I started pushing her away. At first, it was subtle. I'd cancel plans or make excuses for not being as involved in the things she cared about. I convinced myself it was because I was too busy, too focused on my work to truly be present. But deep down, I knew I was pulling away because I didn't want her to see how lost I was feeling. I didn't want her to see the cracks forming inside of me. The longer I stayed in this mindset, the more distant I became, both from her and from the person I used to be. Jenna would ask if everything was okay, and I'd lie, telling her everything was fine. But it wasn't. Nothing felt fine. And I couldn't admit to her, or even to myself, that I was afraid. Afraid of never measuring up. Afraid of failing her, and failing myself. I had built this belief, this bubble, that I needed to be more, do more, accomplish more before I could truly be the man I thought she deserved. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something I wasn't ready to admit. Maybe I was the one standing in the way of my own happiness. Maybe I was the one making this harder than it had to be. But by then, it was too late. I had already built a wall so high, I wasn't sure how to tear it down. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. Nothing about the day felt different, but everything about it changed the course of my life. Jenna had just finished telling me about a big promotion she'd gotten at work, her voice bubbling with excitement. As usual, I smiled, nodded, and told her how proud I was of her. But inside, a storm was raging. The same storm that had been brewing for months, the storm of doubt, inadequacy, and fear. I couldn't take it anymore. The constant feeling of falling short, the growing distance between us, the suffocating weight of my own insecurities, it had all built up into something I couldn't ignore any longer. That night, as she sat there, glowing with happiness, I felt like I was fading into the background. She was going places, and I was stuck. I knew Jenna deserved someone who could match her energy, her ambition, someone who could look at her without feeling like they were always playing catch-up. And I hated myself for it. I hated that my feelings of inadequacy had come to define our relationship. I hated that I had become the kind of man who couldn't celebrate his partner's success without feeling like a failure. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to snap out of it. All I knew was that I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. The distance between us was no longer just emotional, it was palpable, physical, and the gap between us was growing wider by the day. That's when it hit me. I had to let her go. I couldn't keep holding her back, and I couldn't keep pretending to be someone I wasn't. I wasn't ready to be the man she deserved, and I didn't want to drag her down any further. So, without fully understanding why, I told her it was over. The words came out in a rush, like they had been building up inside me for too long. Jenna, I think it's time we end things. I can't do this anymore. I'm not the man you need. Her face froze, her smile slipping into confusion then hurt. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at me, as if trying to process what I had just said. I could see the shock in her eyes, the pain that I had just inflicted with one sentence. And for the first time, I saw her, the real her, start to slip away. You're serious? She asked, her voice trembling. Why? What's going on? I couldn't explain it. How could I explain the quiet, relentless voice in my head that told me I wasn't enough? How could I tell her that it wasn't about her? That it was about me and my own fears and insecurities? I can't keep doing this, I muttered. You deserve someone who can give you what you need. Someone who can keep up with you. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't say anything else. She didn't try to convince me to stay. Instead, she simply nodded, like she had known this was coming for a while. And just like that, I walked away from the only woman who had ever truly understood me. The woman who had loved me even when I couldn't love myself. I left her, not because I didn't love her, but because I didn't believe I deserved her love. The days after the breakup were a blur. I went through the motions of work, of daily life, but nothing felt the same. Jenna's absence was like an open wound, and every reminder of her made it worse. I tried to convince myself it was the right decision, that I was freeing both of us from something we couldn't fix. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't just running from her, I was running from myself. One night, as I sat alone in my apartment, I found myself scrolling through old photos of us. There she was, smiling, full of life, and I remembered how good it felt to be with her, to support her dreams. That's when it hit me. I had let my fears control me. I had given up on something real, something worth fighting for. I had told myself I couldn't keep up with her, that I wasn't enough. But now, it felt like the biggest mistake of my life. I missed her, more than I could admit. And I realized that the woman I thought I couldn't live up to was the one I had loved the most. I spent weeks alone, wrestling with myself. Every day felt like a battle, as I tried to figure out who I was without her, without the life we had built together. I knew I couldn't just sit in my apartment, wallowing in regret forever. But I didn't know where to start. My first instinct was to throw myself into work, to bury myself in the things I could control. But even that felt hollow. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when I decided to take a walk in the park. No agenda, no distractions, just me and my thoughts. As I walked, I found myself thinking about the person I had been before everything spiraled. I remembered the confidence I used to have, the sense of purpose that had driven me. Somewhere along the way, I had lost that. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped believing in myself. I realized then that the journey I needed to take wasn't just about fixing things with Jenna. It was about fixing the things inside me that had been broken long before she and I ever crossed paths. It was about learning to be confident in my own worth, not measuring my success by anyone else's standards. I started small. I picked up the hobbies I had abandoned, the things that had once made me happy without any outside validation. I began to challenge myself, not to be better than Jenna or anyone else, but to be better than I had been the day before. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks. There were days when I wanted to reach out to her, to tell her I had made a mistake. But I knew that wasn't the solution. The real work was about healing from within, about becoming the man I could be proud of, whether or not Jenna ever came back into my life. It had been months since the breakup, and while the pain still lingered, it wasn't as sharp as before. I had settled into a new routine, focused on my own growth, on becoming someone I could finally respect. I started dating again, though the relationships felt different, lighter, less dependent on any single person to fill the void Jenna had left behind. But nothing ever really clicked. Then, one afternoon, I found myself at the local coffee shop, working on some freelance projects. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary, just a quiet afternoon of getting things done. As I sat there, typing away on my laptop, I heard a familiar voice, one I hadn't heard in what felt like a lifetime. Michael? I froze. My heart skipped a beat as I turned to face the voice. There she was, Jenna. Standing in front of me, just like she had when we first met. She looked different, but the same. The years hadn't been unkind to her. Her smile was just as bright, and for a moment, I felt like time had collapsed. Jenna, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Wow, I didn't expect to see you here. She chuckled softly, her eyes twinkling with a mixture of surprise and something else, maybe nostalgia, maybe regret. I could say the same about you, she replied, her gaze softening as she took a seat across from me. How have you been? I swallowed, suddenly unsure of what to say. The last time we spoke, I had been the one to end things, to walk away from everything we had. Now, seeing her again, it felt like a wave crashing over me. Everything I had buried, every emotion I had tried to push aside, was flooding back. I'd been okay, I said, unsure of how to summarize the months since we parted. Still figuring things out. There was a long pause before she spoke again, her voice quieter this time. I've thought about you a lot, Michael. About us. And I think I was wrong to just let it go. To not fight for what we had. I didn't know what to say. I had spent so long thinking I was the one who had messed up, who had let her go because I wasn't enough. But hearing her words, hearing the honesty in her voice, made me realize something. Maybe we both had a part in the way things ended. Maybe it wasn't all on me. I've done a lot of thinking too, I finally replied, my voice steady now. I've realized that I had to work on myself before I could even think about being in a relationship again. But I'm glad to see you, Jenna. I really am. She smiled, a smile that wasn't full of regret but hope, a hope that maybe, just maybe, there was something still worth exploring between us. As we talked more, I began to see her not as the woman I had lost, but as the woman she had always been, strong, independent, and someone who had loved me when I couldn't love myself. It felt different this time. We were both different, and though I didn't know where it would lead, I realized that meeting her again wasn't just a coincidence. It was a chance to rebuild what we had lost, but this time with a new understanding of who we were as individuals, and what we could be together. Over the next few weeks, Jenna and I continued to meet up casually, catching up on the time we had lost. It felt natural, but it was different, like we were both seeing each other with clearer eyes. We'd both changed, grown in our own ways, and I realized that the old wounds weren't as raw anymore. One evening, after a long conversation, I finally admitted, I don't know what the future holds, but I'm open to seeing where this goes. I think we owe it to ourselves to try again. Jenna smiled, her eyes filled with a mix of relief and hope. I think we do. It wasn't an instant fix, and we took things slow. But this time, there was no rushing or pressure. Just two people, trying to build something real, with all the lessons we'd learned from our time apart. In the end, I realized that life doesn't always follow the path you expect. Sometimes it gives you a second chance, not to erase the past, but to create something better from it. As time passed, I began to see how much our relationship had evolved. It wasn't about grand gestures or spontaneous moments anymore. It was about consistency, trust, and respect, things I hadn't fully understood before. In the past, I had been so focused on my own insecurities that I didn't realize love was also about supporting each other through the tough times, not just the easy ones. Jenna and I learned to communicate better, to listen to each other without judgment. When we disagreed, we didn't retreat into silence or anger. We talked it through, worked it out, and came out stronger on the other side. It was a far cry from the relationship we had when we first met, and it felt right. One evening, as we sat on the porch, sipping wine and watching the sunset, I realized just how far we'd come. The road hadn't been easy, and there were moments when I thought we might not make it. But here we were, still standing strong. I never thought we'd get here, I said, looking at her with a mixture of awe and gratitude. But I'm glad we did. Jenna smiled, her hand finding mine. Me too, Michael. Me too. And for the first time in a long time, I truly believe that we were on the right path, not just because we loved each other, but because we had the strength to commit to building a future together. One afternoon, while walking through the park with Jenna, I had an epiphany. We were just enjoying the simple pleasure of each other's company, no pressure, no expectations. I realized that all the pressure I had once put on myself, on us, had been because I didn't understand what love truly was. In the past, I thought love was something that had to be perfect, something that would fix me. I expected it to be easy, to come without effort, and when it wasn't, I'd walk away. But now I saw it for what it really was, imperfect, messy, and still so worth fighting for. With Jenna, I wasn't trying to fill a void anymore. I wasn't expecting her to make me whole. Instead, I realized that true love is about two whole people coming together. Not to complete each other, but to grow together. It's about trust, patience, and knowing that, even on the hard days, you choose each other. As we sat down on a bench, Jenna turned to me with a smile. "What's going on in that head of yours?" she asked, clearly seeing the change in me. "I was just thinking about how lucky we are," I said, squeezing her hand. "I used to think love was supposed to be perfect, but now I see that it's just about being there for each other. We've both come a long way." She smiled back, her eyes filled with understanding. "We sure have." And in that moment I knew that this was the love I had been searching for all along, not the kind that makes everything easy, but the kind that's worth the effort. The kind that lasts. One afternoon, while walking through the park with Jenna, I had an epiphany. We were just enjoying the simple pleasure of each other's company, no pressure, no expectations. I realized that all the pressure I had once put on myself, on us, had been because I didn't understand what love truly was. In the past, I thought love was something that had to be perfect, something that would fix me. I expected it to be easy, to come without effort, and when it wasn't, I'd walk away. But now I saw it for what it really was, imperfect, messy, and still so worth fighting for. With Jenna, I wasn't trying to fill a void anymore. I wasn't expecting her to make me whole. Instead, I realized that true love is about two whole people coming together. Not to complete each other, but to grow together. It's about trust, patience, and knowing that, even on the hard days, you choose each other. As we sat down on a bench, Jenna turned to me with a smile. "What's going on in that head of yours?" she asked, clearly seeing the change in me. "I was just thinking about how lucky we are," I said, squeezing her hand. "I used to think love was supposed to be perfect, but now I see that it's just about being there for each other. We've both come a long way." She smiled back, her eyes filled with understanding. "We sure have." And in that moment I knew that this was the love I had been searching for all along, not the kind that makes everything easy, but the kind that's worth the effort. The kind that lasts.